This session is entitled The Evolution of Stewardship and the Rise of the Progressive Wealth Holder. And to discuss it here with me today, I'm very pleased to say I'm joined by Stephanie Brobbey, that's furthest away, the CEO and co-founder of the Good Ancestor Movement. Second in from her is Alexandra Loydon, Director of Partner Engagement and Consultancy at St James's Place Private Clients. And next to me is Julia Davies, who is an impact investor, campaigner, and also a member of Patriotic Millionaires UK, about which we will talk more. So the way in which high net worth individuals approach their wealth is changing. More wealthy people see themselves as stewards with a responsibility to use their wealth for the benefit of society or the planet. The wider wealth management industry is beginning to change too. So in this session, we're going to meet some of those progressive wealth holders. Actually, in fact, Julia is one of them, and talk about the wider industry too. So, Julia, I think the kind of proof of the statement in our title lies in that organisation, Patriotic Millionaires UK, of which you're a member. Can you talk about that in a second? But first, just a little bit about your career, a bit of background. How did you get into a position where you could support causes such as that?
Absolutely. Do I need to press anything on this?
No, it should work.
Excellent. Okay. Very quickly, my story, because it's not super interesting, is that I was a commercial lawyer, and I was also involved in setting up a company called Osprey Europe, and we distributed backpacks. And I was just explaining about how the success of that company and our ability to get myself now into a position where I am a member of Patriotic Millionaires was really came out of that time. And I'm not sure it would come so easily for people right now, because I shocked Stephanie earlier when I told her that I went to university when there were no fees. You should have seen her face when I told her that. She couldn't believe it. And also Osprey Europe, the company which then led to me becoming a member of Patriotic Millionaires, was set up with the proceeds of our house. So we sold our house, we set up the company. And again, we were able to do that because whilst we were working, I had no student debt. And so we were able to very quickly buy our first house with a 100% mortgage, an affordable house at that time. And then whilst we worked, we did up houses, we bought another house, and we built up the equity to set up the company. And that's not a situation that I think many young people would find very easy to achieve these days. So I think that's a good example of how things have changed. And perhaps that's a good background for what Patriotic Millionaires is all about, because fundamentally it's about how we have got to a situation of extreme wealth inequality. And that is something which has many areas of inequality and injustice. And I think there's a generational aspect to that as well. I think young people are finding it much more difficult now to achieve the kind of success that I had. But we're also making it much harder for many, many people in this country. And ultimately, I think we also are going to make it harder for ourselves as well, because it doesn't matter how much wealth you have. If you live in a country with extreme wealth inequality, which we do now have, that's a less good society for absolutely everyone.
Sure. Okay, so your journey at a different time, in a time when society and the economy worked in a different way, when people could sort of make their own way and build wealth in a different way in this country. You became a successful entrepreneur. You've now decided to join this organisation, Patriotic Millionaires UK. Can you tell us what it is? What does it do? Yeah,
well, my reason for being there is I'm very, very passionate about tackling the multiple crises that we all face. So as well as my journey as a lawyer and being part of setting up Osprey Europe, I'm also a parent, and from being a teenager, I've been very, very aware of the wrong decisions we've been making about how we look after our world, which is where we live, it's our home. So I've always been aware that we were causing significant problems to the environment, which the environment kind of seems like it's something else, it's nothing to do with us, but actually the environment just means the home in which we live, the place which produces our food, the place where species other than humans live, but also humans live. So I've always been aware of that. So when I sold out of Osprey Europe, I felt that at that time, that gave me the tools which enabled me to do something about this crisis that I was very well aware of. And I've been trying to live my life sustainably, but that only gets you so far. But now suddenly I had some money to do something about it. So my focus was completely environment, biodiversity, wildlife. But actually, these are massive, massive, big problems, and they're completely tied together with social issues as well. So I became aware of movements to address tax justice, basically, to increase taxation, which when I say taxation, I mean I see investment. Taxation is investment in our public services. Taxation is investment in us living in a better society, in a better country at a national level. So I see taxation of those who've got the most money, who are able to make that investment, as fundamental to addressing the things that I'm most passionate about, which happen to be the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis. But it doesn't really matter what you're passionate about. If you're passionate about young people and giving them opportunities, if you're passionate about looking after our elderly and vulnerable, about giving women opportunities, about, the arts and culture, all of that exists better in a well-funded state. Because the private sector can do lots, philanthropy can do lots, but they cannot tackle issues when we're at the scale that we are now. We need to increase investment, and when I say investment in this respect, I'm talking about taxation. So for me, it's just plain good manners for people that have got the money to do so, to pay more in taxation / investment.
And so Patriotic Millionaires is sort of the UK offshoot of something that started in America. I think Abigail Disney is sort of a well-known backer of that organisation, but there are various high net worths who are members of it. And essentially, it's campaigning for a different type of tax regime, and that's now started up in the UK. And are you one of the founding members, or one of the early members of that group? How many sort of members are there, roughly speaking?
Oh, goodness. I'd say we have members who are active, like myself, and they have members who sign our letters, and then we have members who are just sort of follow what we're doing. But in the first year where we did a letter to Davies about the need to address wealth extremism, I think we got about 100 signatories, and then the following year that doubled, and the numbers are increasing. So I think you could say that's small numbers, but I think there are more and more people that understand that it doesn't matter how much money you've got unless we address these fundamental issues. We can't protect our kids, we can't protect our grandkids, and in fact we can't protect ourselves. So we need to address these issues, and like I said, they're so significant. We've got to do these at a national and international level, and that does require those who can do so to chip in more. I mean, just as an example, in the UK, and I think it's pretty much the same in the States, only 4 pence in the pound of taxation comes from taxation of wealth. The rest of that is coming from income and consumption, and that affects people who work far more. So, a response which we sometimes get is that the wealthiest pay most tax. Yeah, but they've got most money. So it's absolutely so they should. And the extent to which they've got most money has massively accelerated over recent decades. The recent Sunday Times Rich List illustrated that. So I'm terrible on stats, so forgive me if I get this wrong, but something like when they first started the Sunday Times Rich List, which I think was 1989, am I right there?
Sounds about right.
The top 200 wealthiest families who are featured in the list, their wealth was 6,000 times that of the average person in the UK. So that's the average person. That's not somebody on benefits. That's the average person. So the 200 wealthiest families had 6,000 times the wealth of the average person in the UK. In the latest list, it's now 18,000. So those are stark figures, aren't they? I would say those are extreme figures, and we've allowed that to happen in recent decades. And a lot of that transfer of wealth has actually come from all of us in the form of the wealth of our government, our public wealth, to just a few individuals. And personally, I don't think that benefits anyone. Ultimately, it doesn't matter how much money you've got. I'm assuming that you might want to walk down the streets. I'm assuming you might want to allow your kids to go out at night. I'm assuming that if you were involved in a road crash, you would expect an ambulance to turn up and take you to hospital, because I'm not aware that, if you're out in the countryside, there's any private ambulances that are going to come and get you anytime soon. So personally, I think that these are things which affect everyone. I think we are all better off when we were all better off. And this isn't socialism. This isn't go and live in Cuba, as we sometimes get thrown at us. There's a vast, vast difference between saying that we believe that extreme wealth inequality is bad for society and saying that we think everybody should be the same, and people who work hard shouldn't benefit. Nobody is saying that. Absolutely, those who work hard, those who create opportunities, of course they should benefit. But actually, I don't believe it benefits anyone ultimately when we get to this level of extremism.
Sure. Okay. So thank you, Julia. It's a really good introduction. I mean, it's showing the proof of what we're saying in this title of the session, that there are wealthy people who are starting to think differently about what their wealth means and the responsibilities that are incumbent upon them by virtue of holding it. Stephanie, can we come to you now and talk a little bit about your journey? Because you started off as a sort of traditional private client lawyer, but you now have gone and done something quite different. So can you just tell us about that story and what you've done?
Sure, thank you. It's kind of strange to be back in this new capacity that I'm in as founder and CEO of the Good Ancestor Movement. I have to say, I used to skip into work. I loved my job. I loved the fact that it was a bit nerdy and it was full of intellectual curiosity and academic rigor, and I worked with brilliant colleagues and referrers. And I didn't have a sense of consciousness about what my role was actually doing in the world. I was someone that was always passionate about social impact, and I spent a lot of time working on what I used to call my ethical side hustles, or I suppose what I call them now, sitting on various boards, helping charities, raising money for grassroots organisations, real interest in philanthropy and impact investing, and working with clients that were ultimately seeking to do good in the world. And I qualified in 2011, which you'll recall was kind of a year after the coalition government came into power, and therefore I joined the private wealth profession at a time where we had this decade that was punctuated by election cycles, which were characterised by this rhetoric about the threat of a Labour government and the threat of taxes going up. And I didn't pay that much attention to it at first, but kind of as the years went on, I began to feel quite agitated about this rhetoric around fear, around the threat of taxation, and thinking, well, actually, all of my clients can afford to pay more tax. And I kind of felt like I was on this decade-long journey of capital in the 21st century, understanding that I was part of a system that would help lots of people get a safety deposit box in the sky, as we used to say and joke in the office, and continue to accumulate wealth and essentially concentrate ownership. And essentially my position personally became untenable because I realised that I was in direct conflict with the world that I envisage and the world that I want to see for people in, when I think often, we encourage people to think about their children or, nieces and nephews or, I like to say any child that you are irrationally crazy about, what's the world that you want them to live in? And I realised that what I was doing on a day-to-day basis was incompatible with that vision. And so I was coming into contact actually with more wealth holders who were interested in doing something different and actually in experiencing significant discomfort. And that's something that characterises, many of the wealth holders who, when they first come into contact with us, they all find different ways of saying, I have way more money than I need, and I don't know how to get out of this trap. I want to stop accumulating wealth. I want my wealth to be working in the world and doing good for the world. And so we started the Good Ancestor Movement really as an answer to the hunger, the thirst that was being displayed by an emerging vanguard of wealth holders who want to push back against the narratives that have become out of control in our world, in our society. The legitimization of extreme wealth accumulation and the perpetuation of extreme wealth concentration at a time where we are facing multiple existential crises. We live in the age of polycrisis. And I think, as I reflect back on my time as a private wealth lawyer, as a solicitor, I think about how I was able to continue doing the work that I was doing, and that was because we found ways, we operated in a way that enabled us to decontextualize our work, to detach from the ordinary, the world that's out there and the lives of ordinary people. We were kind of in a gilded cage, I suppose. And I think it's really important that, I talk very often about the fact that wealth is not created in a vacuum. And it's really important to recognize what, the elements that contribute to wealth creation and wealth accumulation and the wealth transfers that happen, and the way that we talk about wealth. I'm glad that you mentioned kind of extreme wealth inequality, Julia, because there's a way to talk about what's happening in the world that involves talking about extreme poverty. But why do we never talk about extreme wealth? And so these are the questions that we grapple with, and that wealth holders come to us with, and we support them through our consultancy practice to transform their relationship to wealth, their relationship to the economy, and to steward their wealth in a way that makes them proud.
Sure. And I think part of this session is perhaps to realise that there is a constituency of wealthy people who have beliefs like the ones that you've described. And you have run a business which earns fees from those people, delivering them a service that they want. So can you talk to us a little bit about those people and what it is they want, what you seek to give to them?
Yeah, they want to feel like they are living in alignment with their values, their values about the world that we live in, about their role in the world, about where their wealth has come from, how they see themselves as having a great responsibility as a wealth holder in society to do the right thing at this time of crisis that Julia was explaining. And how that manifests really is we support them through our consultancy practice to look at their values and to look at their practices around wealth and tax, and to see not if but how they are misaligned, where there is incongruence with their values and their wealth stewardship, where they might be inadvertently avoiding tax when they don't want to be. Many of the people that we work with see their responsibility to pay fair taxation as an extension of their citizenship, the practice of good citizenship, which may surprise you, but this is what people feel. And they, when they try to explain this, they try to put this into words to their advisors, they're often ignored, or they don't feel that they're really, really heard. And more importantly, they don't feel that those beliefs and values are reflected in how their wealth is managed, and what practices they're steered into. And so we do a lot of work looking at their practices around investment, around tax, around the scale of wealth, so the kind of $1 question, $1 billion question for many people is how much is enough and how much is too much. Most of the people that come to us know that they want to reduce wealth over time, and so we look at different ways of doing that, primarily through helping them to see the capital that maybe they've inherited or they've created no longer as something that has to keep growing traditionally through real estate markets or traditional financial markets, but really to start seeing that capital as a tool that can be used to absorb risk for communities that can't afford to absorb that risk. And so we often say that our mission is really to leverage the power of private capital in order to support the transition to a new economy. And that new economy, many of you will have heard of Kate Raworth, who wrote Donut Economics, who painted this beautiful vision for us of an economy that is fundamentally distributive and regenerative by design, an economy where we live in balance with the planet and with the life-sustaining systems of nature, and one that where opportunities and value and capital are not concentrated but actually spread out around the world. And so we we use that as an inspiration to guide people into making decisions about where they're going to shift their capital away from speculation and into the real economy. And I think Julia can probably speak to some of the things that are very emergent still at this stage, but very much focused on building economic empowerment at a local community level that is kind of fundamentally participatory and regenerative. And so there's a real opportunity for the wealth holders that we're working with, but many, many other wealth holders to start thinking about their capital, start thinking about how much they really need, and how much they choose to retain for their families, and to start thinking about shifting capital back into communities.
Okay. And I want to bring in Alexandra Loydon here of St James's Place Private Clients. Alexandra, I think it's sort of testament to the approach of your business in St James's Place that you're supporting this event, supporting this conversation and taking part in it. I mean, the company is a huge player in the market, in the private wealth space, but it's also a very broad church in terms of its client base. So can I ask your perspective on the kind of shift that we're talking about and what you're starting to see from some of your clients?
Yes, yeah, of course, Edwin. And I think you've achieved a hat trick today, because I too started life as a lawyer. And the reason I say that, it sort of links to something that Julia said. I'm a little bit older than Stephanie, so I started my legal career in 2005. And for those of you who are of a similar age, you'll remember the changes that were introduced in 2006 to all the changes to the inheritance tax and trust legislation that, to your point, Julia, implemented a far more onerous tax implications for the wealthy. And I remember at the time we were all scrabbling around trying to find ways to mitigate it. And why I say that is I moved into financial services in sort of 2010. And actually what we've seen over that sort of 15, 20-year period is a greater acceptance, not by all clients by any stretch, but a greater acceptance that when you get to a level of wealth where, how much is enough, or I've got more than I need, there is an emergence of a greater acceptance to pay tax. As I say, not all clients are in that camp, but I would certainly say over the past couple of years, the focus on a more impact investing approach has certainly been driven by that millennial generation, and increasingly so by the sort of the generation before as well. So we are seeing a shift.
Sure. And how do you see that playing out sort of maybe in the next 5-10 years in terms of your offering to clients? Clearly you already have products that can satisfy those kinds of demands, but do you think that's going to change and continue?
Well, we started, we were slightly, possibly slightly sort of ahead of the curve as some of our fellow competitors were. But back in 2018, we sort of implemented a strategy to ensure that 100% of our fund managers were signatories to the UNPRI. We've implemented an impact and sustainability fund. We do an awful lot in terms of working with the next generation. We implemented an education program in conjunction with Imperial College and 91 last year. So we are very. That's just a short summary of a long list of things that we've done as part of our strategy. So yeah, in answer to your question, it's something that is integral to what we do, and increasingly we are being held to account by clients. And I think just one more point to add there. I think from our perspective, it's fairly well known that we are firm believers in active management, and that too enables us to ensure that we are, holding the companies that our clients are investing in to account in a way that you might otherwise not be able to.
Sure. And when you look at the market and you think about the group of clients who want the kinds of products and processes that you're talking about, do you think that there's a danger that certain sections of the market might not satisfy that? Do you think there's a danger of people being left behind? Do you think that the sands are going to shift
Other sounds going to shift. I mean, it's pretty well documented, and there's lots of different figures that fly around. But I mean, you know, the sort of the $5.5 trillion that's going to pass to the next generation over the next 30 years. You know, I think we're going to see a shift in where that wealth sits. We're starting to see it, and I can only predict that is going to pick up momentum over the next 5 to 10 years. And I think we are going to see more clients, the next generation of clients, to Julia and Stephanie's point, want to take more responsibility. They want to become more responsible in their approach to managing their own wealth.
Sure. So up until now, we've really been talking about the way that the private wealth industry is reacting to its clients and its customers' demands and hopes and all that sort of thing, but it's not necessarily only passive and reactive, is it? Like, there is a possibility here that the industry could shift other people's expectations, that it can do things to move the dial. Stephanie, I think that's possibly something that you're well placed to comment on. Are there ways that you would like private client advisors in the audience today to think about their work and their industry that they perhaps don't already? Ways that you'd like to change their minds and perceptions?
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes back to saying, you know, what I was explaining earlier about wealth not being, you know, we're not in a vacuum. Wealth is not created in a vacuum. There are systems and structures and processes and a culture and leadership that has brought us to where we are. You know, we're living at a time where billionaire wealth has increased by 1,000% since 1990. We're living at a time where the 2/3, I think, of all new wealth that was generated since the pandemic has accrued to the richest 1% in the world. And there's a whole system that enables that to happen. And I think it's really important for private client advisors to understand the context that you're working in, understand what is going on in the world and how some of your work will be contributing to that. We incubated something called the Progressive Advisor Movement, which is really seeking to leverage insights from the industry and produce research reports to try and transform the way that the private wealth industry is operating and to better facilitate more progressive approaches to wealth stewardship and ultimately to be part of supporting the transition to a new economy that is fundamentally regenerative and distributive. This is coming. What our economic system as it stands today is not capable of being sustained in its current capacity. It will collapse at some point, and there is an opportunity to participate in being part of a transition to an economic system that works for everyone. And everyone who is alive at this time has an opportunity and a responsibility to respond to that meaningfully, and that includes private wealth advisors. So I think it's really important to understand what is going on contextually in this country and around the world, and what are the practices that are happening around extreme wealth accumulation and tax minimization that are contributing to that problem.
Thank you. And I think some of what we've heard today might strike some people in the audience as rather radical, to be quite frank, but it's not necessarily so left field, some of it, Julia, is it? I mean, you said earlier, actually, you're not calling for tearing down of the edifice of Western society. You're talking about refreshing capitalism. Can you expand on that?
Absolutely. We don't have time for a revolution. Because we have to act quickly. And I often think, well, if you can only think in terms of what is best for you, I would think about your careers. If you're wealth managers, I would think about who your new client's going to be, and they're potentially going to be the children, the next generation of your current clients. And they're going to look at what job their parents did, and what job you did in advising them. Because I see wealth as firefighting equipment. We can say that everybody can do something to address the many crises we face, but actually what a lot of people can do is really small. And I think the more wealth you have, the more firefighting equipment you have. And I like to sort of say about say you lived on a street and, there were houses down one end of the street on fire. They hadn't come to your house yet, but you happened to be the house that had all the firefighting equipment. What would you do? Would you use that, or would you just wait until it got to your house? And so I think as wealth managers, you're in a position of either encouraging your clients to basically use their firefighting equipment, or saying, no, don't worry about that. It's not on your house yet. You carry on. But I think their kids, so maybe your next clients, they're going to see and they're going to judge what their parents did, and they're going to judge what you did as their advisors. So if there's nothing else, that would motivate you to address these issues, I would think about that. Because we are in a very, very drastic situation. If you're lucky enough not to have appreciated that, then maybe just enjoy it for a little bit longer. But the situation we're in is extreme. It's really extreme. Things are going to get very, very much worse unless we do something about it. And the thing is, you are representing people who can do something about it. You could be encouraging your clients to be part of the movement that actually said, no, we've gone far enough on this. We've allowed, other life on Earth to be lost, and we'll allow extinctions to get to a point where that's it, we're going to say no. We've allowed dangerous climate change to get to a point that we're going to crack on and sort this out. And everybody's going to say it's somebody else's responsibility. Of course, I think it's the government's responsibility, which is why I want us all to invest more in the public purse through taxation. But the wealthiest in society are the people who can actually really do something about this. And unfortunately, it's the wealthiest in society who are right now advocating to slow down the pace of tackling these huge issues. And maybe they think that they're going to be okay. I don't personally believe they are. And I definitely don't think their kids and their grandkids are going to be okay. So I would just think, you guys, you could be the heroes. Your clients could be the heroes. Because I do believe that in doing the right thing, not only are you doing the right thing, but a lot of joy and pleasure comes from that. So I talk a lot about the fact that, as well as advocating for more taxation of wealth, I try to use my wealth to stimulate as much change as possible. I've got a whole project called Funding Nature where I encourage people to support restoration of land. I'm currently involved in a project to speed up community energy because I believe that, we all believe that it's good to diversify our investment portfolios. I believe we also need to diversify, energy production. And so let's get some of it in the hands of local communities. But you guys, you could be part of the turning point. You could be part of what protects your children, your grandchildren, your clients' children and grandchildren's future. And isn't that worth something?
And Alexandra, we're talking about thinking about capitalism, thinking about wealth, thinking about all these things in a different way. We might also start to think about returns in a different way. We heard Paul Aberley, the CEO of Charles Stanley, with many billions of pounds under management, sit here and say that his clients are more interested in returns, thank you very much, the bulk of them anyway. So returns are important to people, but it might be that people start to think about returns in a slightly altered way. Can you talk about that a bit more?
Yeah, I think that's right, Edwin. Let's not, be under any illusion here. The vast majority, if not all clients, when they are investing, they're looking for sort of capital preservation and growth, so on the whole. But I think that the question of returns is a really interesting one. And Julia, you raised a really, really valuable point there around retention. I think it was an EY report I was reading a couple of weeks ago. It was a global report, so not specifically to the UK, but it was saying that there is an enormously high, something like sort of 70% of the next generation of clients switch advisors as soon as they inherit the wealth. And one of the big drivers there is the fact that they want to take a different direction. It wasn't specifically focused on sort of what direction they want to take, but I think the more we can do as an industry, the more we can do as advisors to engage the next generation, to understand what the next generation, educate the next generation, to your point, Julia, then it will, we become future fit as businesses. As an industry, and we have as an industry as well an enormous opportunity to be a we are part of that journey of change. You know, when you look at the level of wealth that collectively in this room that we manage, the impact that we could have is absolutely enormous. And I do genuinely believe that we all have a role to play, not just in facilitating what the next generation of clients want, but educating the current generation of clients as well.
Thank you. We have just a couple of minutes left, so if there are any questions in the audience, we can take them now. I think we might have one on the front row.
Hello, panel. Thank you very much for that fascinating journey, really. May I ask, Julie, you talk about the jeopardy in quite strident terms that people in the room and their clients face. What jeopardy are you talking about? Are we talking people with pitchforks and torches coming down the street? I mean, to make light of it, but it's a very serious point, actual insurrection, civil disruption as a result?
We're talking about collapse of food systems, we're talking about sea level rises, we're talking about whole areas of the world becoming uninhabitable. So the level of migration, which we're not very happy about now in this country, is going to become massively exacerbated, and it will have been caused by people fortunate enough to live in countries like this. So right now we have I mean, you'll be aware of the scale of the wildfires in Canada. You'll be aware of the flooding that's been happening all over the world. We're experiencing extremes of sea temperature rises right now, which is causing mass die-offs of marine life. We don't really know what that's going to cause. We already know that we're facing loss of the ice at the poles, so obviously we're not going to lose it in the Antarctic, we're going to lose it in the Arctic. So the scientists predict, you know, meters of sea level rise. So think about what areas of every single country that's going to lose. So that's squeezing people into smaller spaces. That's squeezing our food production into smaller spaces. This is all going to lead to a very, very unstable world. We already live in a world that's facing many, many challenges, but this is going to get far, far more difficult and extreme. And people aren't going to just sit down and die in parts of the world where they cannot, you know, there's already places where kids can't go outside at certain times of the year, and what places where we were producing food, we're not going to be able to produce food. We're already facing water crises. You know, the water that we've taken for granted, even in the UK, we're facing water crises now. You know, there's rivers in the UK where the oxygen levels have dropped to such a level, all the fish are dying, and that's just happening now, and it doesn't even feel like a particularly hot summer, does it? You know, but we're already facing water shortages in the UK. So these are really, really significant problems, and if people in the room don't understand that yet, then I would really hope that you will just have a little read and understand how significant this is, because it may not be affecting you personally yet, but it will. There's no way out of being affected by the level of upheaval that it's going to cause to the world. You know, when we have water shortages, food shortages, whole areas of the world where people can't live, then that's going to rebound on everyone, no matter how much money you've got, unless you manage to get to Mars and pass it. I don't want to go there.
We've just got a minute and a half left. Stephanie,
thank you, Julia. I just wanted to come in here because I don't know if you saw there was a study by L'Atelier BNP Paribas, which is the independent research subsidiary of the French bank, last year. And that study found that Britain was ranked the second most unsustainable of 36 economies and was at the risk of civil unrest, essentially, primarily because of the high costs of housing and childcare. And we all know what has happened since March 2022. And we're living in the time of strikes and all of that. And also another, Thomas Piketty, who's the French economist, has said that we are heading backwards towards 19th century levels of inequality. So putting those two things together, it's not a good time, and it's really time to wake up and understand the context that we're living in.
Okay, thank you very much. We're going to wrap things up there. So all there. Oh, sorry. Yes, one more question. Yeah. In 30 seconds, if we can.
Everyone can hear me. My name is Diana. I'm from Dubai. I am from a place where wealth is still connected to people, real people like you and me. So when I look at, you know, the Forbes list and I see people from my part of the world on Forbes list, I know that these are the wealthy people, and I know that these people exist. But don't you see a challenge for yourselves? I mean, leaving the law, I'm still a lawyer, and going into something where you would steward these wealthy people into thinking of more of a better way of how can they use their wealth. Wealth is not people anymore. It's corporates. It's figures, it's businesses, it's how do you get to these people? Honestly, I still look at the philanthropist in my part of the world. I still see hope because I see that they can reach out to people. They can say, we need schools in those areas. We have refugee camps, in other countries where it would be good to help. I still see money going out of these people because they believe that there are people like them somewhere that they need them. But how do you do it now? It's nothing. There are no people anymore. I mean, how do you really see it in the long run? Thank you.
If you want me to I can answer it from a corporate perspective. I absolutely agree. I mean, corporates have an enormous role. I mean, we're all corporates sat in the room, or there's probably quite a lot of us representing corporates in the room. And the point I made earlier is that, collectively we can have an enormous impact, particularly the wealth management industry, because, we can hold these companies to account. It's our role to do so. We can use our size, our scale, our expertise, and our clients' wealth to hold these companies to account, to ensure that they are acting responsibly and sustainably, and facing into the challenges that we're facing, that both Stephanie and Julia have alluded to today.
Alexandra, thank you very much. We're going to have to leave it there, but Julia Davies, Alexandra Lloyd and Stephanie Brobbey, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you.